I'm a 33-year-old guy, the oldest of four siblings. I have a 27-year-old sister, a 25-year-old brother, and the youngest is a 22-year-old sister. For most of my life, I've felt like we were a close-knit family. We have weekly Sunday dinners, something I've always looked forward to. Holidays, birthdays, and even random weekend gatherings were centered around family. They've always been the cornerstone of my social life, or at least, that's how it used to feel. Lately, though, things have been different. It's hard to explain, but the dynamic has shifted, and I feel like an outsider. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I'd show up to dinner, and it felt like I was missing pieces of the conversation. They'd laugh about something, and when I asked what it was, I'd get vague answers like, "Oh, just catching up," or "You had to be there." I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. Then, something happened that I couldn't ignore. One random Tuesday night, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a story posted by my brother's girlfriend. It was a picture of my family at a restaurant, a nice one we'd usually reserve for special occasions. They all looked happy, laughing together. But I wasn't there. At first, I thought it must be an old photo. Then, I noticed the timestamp. It was from that very night. The next day, I casually brought it up to my mom, trying not to sound accusatory. I mentioned seeing the picture and asked if they'd had a nice time. She gave me this weird, almost guilty smile and said, "Oh, it was just a last-minute thing. We thought you were busy with work." It didn't sit right with me. My schedule isn't unpredictable, and even if it were, they'd usually check in. But I let it go, hoping it was a one-time thing. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more and more events I wasn't invited to. Brunches, game nights, even a trip to the beach. All things I only found out about through social media posts or offhand comments in group chats. It wasn't just one person excluding me either. It seemed like the whole family was in on it, and I had no idea why. I started paying closer attention. Looking through our family group chat, I noticed jokes and references I didn't understand. It felt like there were two versions of my family, one that included me and one that didn't. I began to wonder if I'd done something to upset them, but I couldn't think of anything specific. The breaking point came last Sunday. My mom called earlier in the day to cancel our usual dinner, saying they'd reschedule. Later that evening, I saw another Instagram post, another dinner at my parents' house with the whole family. Except for me. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't random. They were deliberately excluding me. It felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to call them and demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I spent days avoiding their messages, trying to process everything. I finally decided to confront them when my mom mentioned a casual family brunch at a nearby cafe. I showed up early, determined to get some answers. As they arrived, I could tell something was off. My siblings avoided eye contact, and my mom forced a smile. Once everyone was seated, I brought up the Instagram posts. I listed specific events they'd excluded me from and asked if I'd done something to upset them. The silence was deafening. My brother finally muttered that there was a reason I wasn't being included, but it's complicated. My mom tried to brush it off, saying I was overthinking things. I couldn't take it anymore. Furious, I stood up and left, ignoring my mom's calls to come back. That night, my youngest sister texted me, saying it wasn't what I thought and promising to explain soon. She begged me to give them more time, but I didn't reply. Later, my dad called, sounding guilty. He apologized for everything and said he was sorry for how things had unfolded. I asked my dad to tell me the truth, but all he said was that it wasn't his place to explain. He kept repeating that it was complicated and that I needed to trust them. I hung up feeling even more lost. The next morning, I reached out to my aunt. She's always been like a second mom to me, and I figured if anyone would tell me what was going on, it would be her. We talked for a while, but the conversation felt strange. She seemed surprised when I told her what had been happening, and there were long pauses, like she was trying to decide what to say. Before we ended the call, she gave me a cryptic warning. Just be patient. You'll understand soon enough. Then she hung up. I was left staring at my phone, more confused than ever. What could be so big that everyone was keeping it from me? Why did it feel like they were all on the same page, except for me? I couldn't just sit and wait anymore. The fact that even my aunt was acting strange meant this went deeper than I thought. If they wouldn't tell me, I'd find out on my own. This wasn't just about a few missed dinners anymore. It felt like my entire family had built a wall around me, and I was done being shut out. Update 2. Digging for the truth. After the disastrous brunch confrontation, I realized I needed to take matters into my own hands. My sister's cryptic text and my dad's guilty apology only made things worse. It was clear that if I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. I came up with a plan. First, I borrowed my best friend's phone to create a new Instagram account, a generic profile that I used to follow my family and some of their close friends. I figured if I was being left out of events, their posts or stories might offer clues. It didn't take long for something to slip up. A couple of days later, my youngest sister posted an Instagram story. It was a casual photo of her and my brother hanging out, but what caught my eye was a screenshot of a text exchange in the corner of the image. The name of the group chat? Family Time, No OP. My heart sank. I quickly took a screenshot before she could delete it. There it was, undeniable proof that they had created a group chat specifically without me. This wasn't just random missed invitations. They had gone out of their way to exclude me entirely. I felt sick but knew I needed to stay calm. I couldn't confront them without more information. Later that night, I called my youngest sister and asked her to meet me. We met at a small coffee shop, and as soon as I showed her the screenshot, her face went pale. She started stammering, saying it was a mistake and that I wasn't supposed to see it. I pressed her, demanding to know why there was a group chat without me. She looked like she was about to cry, clearly panicking. After a long silence, she admitted it. The chat had been created about 6 months ago, specifically to discuss something personal they didn't want me to know about. She begged me not to tell our parents that she'd told me. I asked her what could possibly be so personal that it warranted shutting me out, but she just kept shaking her head, repeating that it wasn't her place to explain. I could see she was genuinely scared, which made me even more anxious about what they were hiding. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline she mentioned, 6 months ago. That was around the time things started going wrong between me and Kevin, my ex. My family had liked him at first. He'd come to Sunday dinners, joined family events, and my mom even called him a good match for me. But then, almost overnight, their attitude toward him changed. They stopped asking about him, and any time I brought him up, they'd quickly change the subject. We broke up shortly after, but I'd always assumed it was just a coincidence. Now I wasn't so sure. I decided to reach out to Kevin, even though it felt awkward after everything that had happened between us. When he answered, he sounded surprised to hear from me. I asked if he knew anything about my family's sudden change in behavior. After a long pause, he sounded uncomfortable and said he didn't want to get involved. He insisted it wasn't his place to tell me and tried to end the call. I pressed him, telling him I was done being kept in the dark and needed the truth. He finally admitted there had been a situation involving my family right before we broke up, but he refused to give any details. He said it wasn't his story to tell and hung up. I was left staring at my phone, feeling more lost than ever. I updated Reddit with everything I'd learned so far. The responses were overwhelming. People were furious on my behalf and filled the comments with theories. Some thought it might involve an affair, others suggested financial trouble, and a few even speculated about a secret paternity issue. Then, late that night, I received a private message from a burner account. It simply read, "Your family thinks they're protecting you. They don't want you to find out what happened last year." Before I could reply, the account was deleted. I racked my brain, trying to remember if anything significant had happened last year, but nothing stood out, at least nothing that could explain all of this. I'd had enough. If my family wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd confront them directly. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove straight to my parents' house, determined to get answers once and for all. I walked in without knocking, catching them both off guard. I didn't waste any time with small talk. I told them I knew about the secret group chat and demanded they explain why I was being left out. My mom looked like she was about to cry, and my dad just stared at the floor, avoiding my eyes. Before either of them could speak, my brother came in through the front door. He took one look at the scene and exploded. He yelled at them, saying I deserved to know the truth and that they couldn't keep lying to me anymore. Then, without giving me a chance to speak, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I turned back to my parents, but they still refused to tell me anything. My mom just kept repeating, "You'll know soon. Just trust us." It felt like a nightmare. I left their house feeling more isolated than ever, knowing that whatever the secret was, it was tearing my family apart. I don't know what's coming next, but I'm done waiting. I'm going to find out the truth, even if it means breaking every barrier they've put up. Update 3. I couldn't keep playing their game of silence anymore. After what happened, my brother storming out and my parents refusing to talk, I hit a breaking point. I opened up the main family group chat, the one I'm still in, and sent a message. I'm done. If you don't tell me what's going on, I'm cutting contact. I won't speak to any of you again until I get the truth. The response was almost immediate. My phone started buzzing with messages, but the first one was a call from my youngest sister. She sounded panicked, pleading with me to meet her in person. She promised to tell me everything if I gave her a chance to explain. I agreed, and we set up a meeting at a quiet cafe we used to go to as kids. It felt like neutral ground, away from the rest of the family. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting in the corner, looking nervous. Her eyes darted around the room like she was expecting someone to walk in and interrupt us. I sat down, and before I could even say anything, she started talking, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt like she was unburdening herself after carrying this weight for too long. She told me that, last year, one of our family friends saw Kevin out with someone else. It wasn't just a casual meeting, they were acting like a couple. The family friend had snapped a photo and sent it to my mom. From there, everything spiraled. My mom showed the photo to my dad, and they decided to confront Kevin directly instead of telling me. Apparently, Kevin admitted to cheating but begged them not to tell me. He claimed he was planning to end things with me soon anyway and didn't want to make it messy. My family, in their infinite wisdom, decided to take matters into their own hands. They made a deal with him. He would break up with me quickly and cleanly, and they wouldn't say a word about the affair. They thought they were sparing me the pain of knowing the truth. As my sister told me this, she looked genuinely upset, like she was reliving it all herself. She said the secret group chat was created shortly after that to make sure no one accidentally let it slip. They used it to coordinate everything, from avoiding mentions of Kevin to planning events without me. They were trying to protect you, she insisted. But now, she realized how badly they had messed up. I just sat there listening. It felt like time had stopped. I wasn't sure if I was going to scream, cry, or just walk out. My sister kept apologizing, saying she thought they were doing the right thing at the time. She admitted that now, seeing how much it hurt me to be left out, she knew it was a huge mistake. They all did. I got up without saying a word and left the cafe. I couldn't sit there any longer. Not after hearing that my entire family had conspired behind my back, thinking they knew what was best for me. I drove around aimlessly for a while, trying to process everything. It felt like I was living someone else's life, like this couldn't possibly be happening. When I got home, I posted an update on Reddit. The response was immediate. People were furious on my behalf. The comments were full of outrage, calling it a massive betrayal of trust. Some users couldn't believe my family would make a deal with my cheating ex instead of telling me. Others thought their intentions might have been good, but they were still completely wrong to keep it from me. The opinions were divided, but the general consensus was that my family had seriously messed up. I told them I'd think about joining them for a family therapy session, but I made it clear that I needed to set some boundaries. I said that if I agreed to go, they'd have to let me lead the conversation. No more secrets, no more lies. If they couldn't handle that, I'd walk out and we'd be done. He agreed. It was a small step, but it felt like the first one towards something better. I'm still not sure where we go from here, but at least we're not stuck in the same cycle of silence and avoidance. For now, I'm taking it day by day. It's going to be a long road, but maybe, just maybe, there's a way forward. Update 5. The first family therapy session was scheduled, and I walked in not knowing what to expect. The air felt heavy, and everyone seemed on edge, like we were all trying to avoid saying the wrong thing. My therapist started by setting ground rules and creating a safe space to talk, but no one spoke up right away. It was tense. We sat there avoiding eye contact, the silence louder than anything we could have said. Eventually, my therapist turned to me and asked me to start. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The betrayal I felt from the secret group chat, the lies they told me about Kevin, and how they made decisions for me without ever asking what I wanted. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I just told them how it hurt. That's when my mom broke down. She started crying, saying she thought she was protecting me. She explained that seeing me with Kevin reminded her of a painful experience from her past, one she never wanted me to go through. She admitted she made a huge mistake and kept apologizing, saying she now realized she'd stolen my agency and trust by keeping everything from me. My siblings stayed quiet, but I could see the guilt on their faces. My brother finally spoke up, admitting that he should have stood up against the plan. He said he was too afraid of upsetting our mom and thought it was better to go along with it at the time. He apologized too, saying he regretted not telling me the truth sooner. I told them how painful it was to be excluded and manipulated like that, how I felt like an outsider in my own family. It wasn't just about the secret they kept. It was about the trust they broke. We all sat there in silence for a moment, letting it sink in. Then I set some clear boundaries. No more secrets, no more making decisions for me. If they couldn't respect that, I'd walk away. They all agreed. It felt like a small victory, but I knew it was only the beginning of a long road ahead. In a symbolic gesture, my brother pulled out his phone right there in the session and deleted the secret group chat in front of everyone. My sisters did the same. They promised to use the main family chat from now on and swore not to hide anything from me again. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. After the session, I decided it was time to close another chapter. I responded to Kevin's email. I thanked him for his apology, but made it clear I wasn't interested in reopening that door. I told him I needed closure and was moving on with my life. I didn't want to hold on to any more bitterness or what-ifs. He replied briefly, saying he understood and wished me the best. It felt like a weight off my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small but meaningful changes in my family's behavior. They checked in with me more often, invited me to casual meetups, and made a real effort to include me in plans. It wasn't perfect, and there were still awkward moments, but it was better than before. They were trying, and that meant something. We decided to start a new tradition, a monthly family dinner where we'd openly discuss whatever was on our minds. No more avoiding tough conversations. At the first dinner, I suggested we each share something we were struggling with. It was awkward at first, but my brother spoke up about how much guilt he'd been carrying since the secret was revealed. My mom opened up about her anxieties and how she'd been projecting her own past trauma onto me without realizing it. It was the first time we'd ever been this honest with each other. It wasn't easy, but it felt like we were finally on the right path. I continued my own therapy sessions, focusing on rebuilding my self-esteem and learning to trust again. I knew I wasn't fully healed, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was getting there. I updated Reddit, thinking it might be my final post. The support from everyone has been incredible throughout this entire mess. It's helped me feel less alone, knowing that so many people out there understood what I was going through. I thanked everyone for their advice and encouragement. It's been a lifeline in a way I never expected. Just when I thought I was ready to close the book on this chapter, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from the family friend who had initially spotted Kevin with the other woman. The letter was filled with apologies. They explained that they never intended for things to spiral like this. They tried to tell me directly about what they'd seen, but my mom intercepted them and insisted they keep it quiet. It was a shocking twist, but it also helped me piece together the final missing part of the story. I decided to have one last conversation with my mom. We met up, just the two of us. We both ended up crying. She admitted she'd let her own fears and past trauma dictate her actions. She said she realized now that she was projecting her own pain onto me, trying to control the situation instead of letting me face it myself. It was a raw, emotional talk, but it ended with a hug and a promise to try to start fresh. Looking back, I've learned a lot from all of this. I've realized the importance of honesty, even when it hurts. I've seen how secrets and lies can destroy trust, no matter the intentions behind them. Rebuilding that trust is going to take time, but I finally feel like we're on the right path. It's not perfect, and it's definitely not easy, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. I'm cautiously optimistic, taking things one day at a time. My family and I still have a lot of work to do, but at least now we're doing it together. And that feels like a good place to start.